Hey guys, Kelade here. Welcome to my Mythic Ashvane kill / commentary video. For this fight, we are going to be charging with all of our cooldowns. Now, I am using Condensed Life Force here because I did get rank 3. This is our second kill, so that's why you're seeing me with this trait, or else I would have still been using, Blood of the Enemy. But right now, for this fight, the talents that I am using, same as all the other ones before: Endless Raise, Double Time, Sudden Death, War Paint, Carnage, Dragon Roar, Siegebreaker, and I'm using Condensed Life Force as my major, rank 3, and also using Crucible of Flame, rank 3 as the minor, right? So also we can kind of talk about the Coral Trinket too, because I am using it also on this fight. So I do pop it right on pull, and then the next time I'm going to pop it is basically whenever I have Condensed Life Force up. That's generally where you're going to be using it, right? You're just going to be activating the Coral, and whenever you get Condensed Life Force again, you're going to take it, consume all the buffs, get all that stack. That way you can do as much damage as you can. Right here for these branding bubbles, just make sure that obviously you put them close enough to the boss, but don't hit the melee with it. And if you're melee, don't stand in the circles until they go down. Once they go down, you do want to make sure you have Dragon Roar for every single one, because it is important that you break those guys out as fast as possible, because the faster that they're out of the branding bubbles, the faster that your overall raid will have DPS, right? So right here, be careful, like those orbs, like if your boss is being moved around while the orbs are still being soaked into the boss, just make sure that you don't chase too close. That way you don't get hit by these. Right now you're seeing this like arcing azurite, right? If you have it, just go out and make sure that the corals get cut. You actually don't want to be too gun-ho about cutting those in Mythic. You kind of just want to cut one at a time with like 2 people, because there's like 3 sets that go out, right? The reason being is that if you cut too many, every time you cut a coral, there's 2 additional soaks that pop up. And if you miss the soaks, another coral spawns. So you can actually cut a coral, miss 2 soaks, and now you're left with 2 corals. So you definitely don't want to do that, right? So definitely watch out for that. It should generally be safe enough for you to just cut one at a time. I think generally there's like 5, I think that's what we get, and maybe more in like the later phases, but it's not that bad. So just pay attention to that, right? So right there, the first carapace phase, we get it around to 70%. That seems normal, I think, for the second week, right? The first week, I think we were averaging around 70 to 72%, just depending on what it is. The other trinket I'm using is also Ink Pod. So as far as for another thing for the coral is you do also want to use it when the boss is at like 31% or right before it hits 30%. That way you can try to get as much crit hit chance as you can on the Ink Pod, because for that trinket, if it crits, it's doing crazy good damage. Right before this pull, we had a wipe. It was like sub 30% wipe, and my coral trinket did crit. And when it did crit, it added 3k DPS to my overall DPS. It went from like 46k to 49k. Also on this fight, we are trying to make it so after the second expose, the boss goes to 35% or lower, because then our Shadow Priest will get their, Twist of Fate, whatever, and then they can start doing more damage throughout the entire, third carapace and also the third exposed phase. So that's what we try to do here. So I am actually going to be messing up a little bit of my cooldowns and not using them right away. Generally, as a Fury Warrior, obviously for the optimal DPS, you just pop your cooldowns whenever you have them. Like right here, I'm saving my Condensed Life Force for the exposed phase. But yeah, so I think if you're able to actually use all of your cooldowns, I can probably hit over 50k DPS on this fight if we actually get to use them all. But regardless, I do end up using my Reckless without Condensed Life Force. As far as for how the cooldown goes with it, basically, for when you're using Condensed Life Force rank 3, you want to use it with every other recklessness, right? They line up pretty well, right? Condensed Life Force is a 3-minute cooldown. Recklessness is a 1.5-minute cooldown, so works out pretty well. And then of course, Siegebreaker is a 30-second cooldown. So your cooldowns will eventually line up pretty well. If you are running Reckless Flurry, you kind of just ignore the reduction in cooldown. But even now, I think a lot of people aren't even running Reckless Flurry anymore, because there's a few other things you can do. So I come out here with my cutter, right? I know the boss gets moved, but I don't want to go on him just yet, because you don't want to move the cutters at the last moment they're being cut, right? Because you want to make sure that you're actually getting the Carl cut, and you also want to make sure you don't drag anybody to it, right? So right there, I did use Dragon Roar right here. That was a mistake. So I should have actually saved the Dragon Roar for when the Briny Bubbles spawn. That way I can just hit him. Another thing about Briny Bubbles, we finally have our utility / immunity in the raid, right? I don't get a Briny Bubble on this pull, but if you do get a Briny Bubble as a warrior, you can Berserker Rage out of it, and you'll be immune to it. So basically, right before it comes down, pop Berserker Rage, and you will not get, I guess, incapacitated. So you're good to go there. So right here, boss about to put characters down. So you do get another. So if you use a Reckless and Siege Break on Bull, you do get it at the very end of that exposed carapace. So we were able to push the boss down, to 34% HP. Great. Now our Shadow Priest can contribute even more to the damage that they can. And then basically, if you get into this phase, it's actually pretty easy as far as for the carapace phase goes, because the faster you get through the carapace phases, the less things you have to worry about as far as for soaking and all that stuff. And you can kind of see, like, basically over there, right, I have that absorb thing that's showing when that weak aura is gone, that's when his carapace is gone. Another thing about the carapace, when you see the little orbs that are flying towards the boss, when he's in the carapace phase, which means when he has the bubble, they will regen his shield, right? But if he's in the exposed carapace phase, they won't actually regen any shield because he doesn't have any. So that's why when you see, when we get to the exposed phases, we just let the orbs go through to the boss. Now, regardless of whether you're in exposed or the carapace phase, whenever the orb hits anything, whether it's the boss or anybody in the raid, you're going to take raid wide damage, right? So generally, you're going to want to, if it's going to be one of those big orbs that in Mythic that requires super soak, you might want to use Enrage Regen for that. And then, of course, you're going to want to use Rally whenever your raid actually needs it. Your raid will probably tell you when you're going to need that. So that's kind of it. So we do Lust here at, like, I think this is the, let me see, this is the third wave here, just so we can push it down faster, right? Trying to kill it in the fourth wave before we get a fifth one. So just use Lust, try to push through this as much as we can. Also helps out with healing, right? Helps out with DPS, breaks the briny bubbles out as fast as we can. Now, as far as for if you had a choice, Berserker Rage is pretty good. You can use it basically every other briny bubble, but you can't use it for every briny bubble. So if you wanted to, you could actually not use it if you think that you're going to get it twice in a row. Basically, it's more important to be immuning the exposed carapace phase brinies than the non-exposed one, right? Because the non-exposed one, you can kind of like kill it a little bit slower if you need to, right? But right here is what I'm talking about. Like, if it's exposed, you just let the orbs hit him, right? A Demon Hunter Darkness right there, and we're good to go. Basically at this point, I also forgot to actually use my ink pod or use my core before ink pod progress. So unfortunately, it didn't crit there. But obviously, if it crits, it's huge damage. And it really changes your DPS if it crits or not. So you definitely want to make sure you're watching out for that. Unlike what I did here, because it is going to help you a lot. Right here, it does get a little tight. Just make sure that you're not getting briny bubbled or getting knocked up. Now, if you are, oh, I can't get out of the briny bubble stuff, just pop Berserker Rage, right? You won't get, incapacitated, so you're good to go. So right there, have all our cooldowns, bursting the boss down, right? The boss is basically dead. Use the Crawl Trinket. Even there's like barely any stacks, you still want to use it before the fight's over, right? And yeah, down she goes. So that's basically it for this fight. You kind of do need to meet the DPS checks. If you can get to 35% beforehand and have your Shadow Priest go wild, that's great. But that is kind of hard. We didn't have that. On our first kill, we actually basically had a lot of people's Tide Pods proc. When we hit 30% HP, he instantly got bumped down to 25%. So that's something you'll also want to be aware of too. But as always, thanks for checking out the video, guys. Feel free to subscribe to see more. See ya.